The air vent's low whir was the only sound as I read the document proving my son had sold me out. Still, I exhaled slowly, letting that steady whir drown the anger rising in my chest. As it deepened, the sound seemed to trace every fracture this betrayal carved through me. While I kept my eyes on the page, the whir turned into a reminder of how long I'd ignored the warning signs. The same quiet hum finally revealed the truth. He didn't stumble, he aimed. That's when I chose my path forward, calm, patient, and devastatingly fair. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Ed Lawson had walked into that boardroom 1,000 times over the past 3 decades, always with the same quiet confidence of a man who built every brick of the company beneath his feet. This morning felt no different, at least at first. The hallway leading to the executive conference room was familiar, polished, humming with soft corporate chatter. He carried a slim folder under his arm, filled with sketches and notes from a late-night brainstorm. A new product idea that, in his mind, could define the company's next decade. He expected a routine strategy discussion, a collaborative session with department heads, maybe even a rare moment of alignment with his son. But the moment he pushed open the glass door, something in the air shifted. Ryan was already standing at the head of the table. His position. Not sitting, not waiting, standing, commanding, claiming. The executives, some old allies, some recent hires, straightened in their chairs as if Ryan had been conducting the meeting long before Ed arrived. The large digital display behind him glowed with slides Ed hadn't seen, a full presentation apparently prepared without his input. A faint ripple of discomfort swept across the room when they noticed Ed step in, though no one said anything. They simply watched him take his usual seat. Except Ryan didn't step aside, didn't gesture for him to take over, didn't even acknowledge him with more than a thin, polite nod. "Morning," Ryan said, clipped and professional. Too professional. The kind of tone people used when they were speaking to a stranger they were obligated to respect, not a father who once carried them on his shoulders. Ed forced a cordial smile and set his folder on the table, trying not to read into the tension. "I've got a new concept I'd like to walk everyone through, something I think could." "Actually," Ryan cut in, his voice clean, sharp, and deliberately projected, "we're shifting today's agenda." Ed blinked, shifting since when? There was a rustle in the room, executives adjusting papers, avoiding eye contact, pretending to be engrossed in the slides in front of them. Ryan didn't flinch. "Since 5 minutes ago, we're moving in a different direction." Ed felt a small sting, but he kept his tone measured. "Fine, then let's look at the revised agenda together." Ryan didn't move aside, didn't defer, didn't pause. Ed tried again. "I brought a new prototype outline I think could strengthen our Q4 position. I'd like to present it before we move on." But Ryan simply lifted one hand and without turning said, "That won't be necessary." A cold ripple flickered through Ed's chest. He leaned forward slightly. "Excuse me." Ryan finally faced him fully, and something in the young man's eyes, an intensity edged with something darker, made Ed's stomach tighten. Ryan spoke calmly, almost casually, yet every syllable was a knife gliding cleanly across decades of history. "Your ideas don't matter anymore. The company has evolved." The words echoed in the boardroom like a dropped metal beam. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Even the soft hum of the air vents seemed to fall silent. Ed's throat tightened. For a moment he couldn't tell if he'd misheard, if maybe the world had paused and his brain had filled in the worst possible phrase. But no, Ryan's expression was steady, almost rehearsed. The executives were frozen in place, mouths slightly open, eyes darting between father and son. And then from across the room, Ed caught the faintest movement. Julia, his daughter-in-law, sitting gracefully near the back, legs crossed, chin lifted. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't offended. She wasn't even pretending to hide her reaction. Instead, she wore a tiny, knowing smirk, the kind that told Ed this moment hadn't just happened. It had been planned, arranged, executed. His hands felt suddenly heavy on the table. The folder he'd brought, the ideas he'd worked on until 2 in the morning, blurred in his vision. He looked at Ryan, hoping to see even a flicker of regret. But his son stood tall, confident, filled with a pride that wasn't his own. Something inside Ed cracked, the quiet, steady part of him that believed family could overcome ambition, that believed legacy meant something sacred. He felt the room tilt, not physically but emotionally, as if the foundation beneath him shifted and revealed a fissure he hadn't noticed before. No one spoke. No one defended him. Not one executive challenged Ryan's words. And that silence cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Slowly, Ed closed the folder. Every movement felt like it belonged to someone older, weaker, someone who had lost more than a meeting. He rose from his chair, steady but hollow. Ryan didn't stop him. Julia didn't look away. The board remained frozen in the tension they helped create. Ed didn't offer a rebuttal or a warning. He didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't even sigh. He simply walked out of the room he once commanded, a man stripped of his place not by enemies, but by the son he built everything for. The hallway outside was quiet, too quiet, and as the door shut behind him with a soft click, Ed felt something darker settling inside him, something he wasn't ready to name. Because betrayal this sharp doesn't end in one meeting. It begins there. The drive home felt longer than it ever had before. Seattle's late summer sky pressed low and gray over the city, the kind of weather that usually made Ed feel thoughtful, maybe even nostalgic. But today the clouds seemed to mirror the heaviness in his chest. Traffic blurred around him, taillights smearing into red streaks as his mind replayed the meeting again and again. Ryan standing at the head of the table, the clipped interruption, the cold final blow. Your ideas don't matter anymore. He gripped the steering wheel tighter every time the words echoed. 30 years of leadership, sacrifice, late nights and early mornings, all reduced to a public dismissal from the one person he'd hoped would one day carry his legacy with pride. He kept swallowing the bitterness rising in his throat, but it wouldn't settle. The shame of sitting there while executives stared at him like he was a relic, the sting of Julia's smirk, the hollow walk out the door, it replayed in relentless loops. By the time he reached the long driveway of the lakeside home he and Martha had lived in for 22 years, he felt drained and strangely cold. He parked, shut off the engine but didn't get out. Instead, he sat there in the stillness, letting the silence wrap around him like a blanket too thin to warm him. His pulse was slow but heavy, each beat carrying the weight of what had happened. Eventually, he forced himself to step inside. The house was dim, only the soft glow of a table lamp spilling across the foyer. He didn't bother turning on more lights. He walked into the living room and lowered himself onto the couch, leaning forward with his hands clasped, staring at the darkened window as if the lake outside could offer answers. He didn't hear Martha approach until she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Ed," her voice was soft, probing, already sensing something was wrong. "You're home early." He lifted his eyes to her, and the moment she saw his expression, her face folded with concern. She sat beside him quickly. "What happened?" For a long second he couldn't speak. His throat tightened, the humiliation too fresh, too raw. Martha took his hand. "Talk to me." He let out a slow breath. He said, in front of everyone, that my ideas don't matter anymore. Martha's eyes widened. "Ryan said that." He nodded once. The disbelief on her face hit him harder than the memory itself. "He cut me down in front of the entire board, like I was in the way." She covered her mouth, shaken. Why would he do something like that? Ed didn't answer because the truth was he didn't know, not fully. Ryan had drifted, yes. He'd grown distant over the past few years, yes. But this, public humiliation, Strategic positioning, the quiet, calculated shift in power, it felt like something or someone had pushed him. Julia's face flashed in his mind. That smirk, that satisfaction. Before he could speak again, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. A message from Carla. "You need to see something." His breath caught. Carla didn't send texts like that unless it was serious. He stood up abruptly. "I need to go." Martha rose with him. "Go where?" Carla found something. Her worry deepened. "Ed, please don't go starting a war, not like this. You're hurt, I'm not starting anything," he said quietly, "but I need to know what's happening." He grabbed his keys again, ignoring the heaviness in his limbs. 10 minutes later, he pulled into the dimly lit back lot behind a quiet cafe where Carla was waiting in her car. She stepped out as he approached, her expression tight with urgency. "Ed," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was nearby, "you need to see these." She handed him a folder, thin but heavier than he expected. Inside were internal memos he had never seen, drafts of proposed leadership structures, lists of department realignments, and strategic notes that removed his name from nearly every major decision. Meetings he wasn't invited to. Initiatives he was excluded from. Every document pointed to the same chilling conclusion. Ryan was stripping away his influence piece by piece, and some pages bore unmistakable traces of Julia's formatting style. Ed felt his chest tighten. "How long has this been going on?" "Months," Carla said quietly. "Maybe longer. I only started noticing when requests began bypassing your office." He stared at the papers, a slow-burning realization spreading through him like wildfire. The way Ryan stood at the head of the table, the rehearsed tone, the silent board, Julia's smirk. The meeting hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't been emotional. It hadn't been a moment of frustration. It had been staged, planned, executed to push him aside. Ed closed the folder slowly, his jaw setting. The humiliation he felt in that boardroom was suddenly replaced by something colder, steadier, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Because now he finally understood. Today wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Ed didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office long after Martha had gone to bed, the quiet of the house settling around him like thick dust. The folder Carla had given him lay open across the desk, its contents an uncomfortable mix of shock and inevitability. He reread the internal memos one by one, each line slicing a little deeper. His name, once the anchor of Lawson Technologies, appeared less and less, and where it did appear, it was usually accompanied by phrases like transition advisory only, limited oversight, or non-operational role pending restructuring. There were charts restructuring the leadership flow, new chains of command, entire departments rerouted away from him, not gradually, not with transparency, but with precision and secrecy. Ed leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't an adjustment. This wasn't natural succession. This was targeted removal, piece by piece, quiet enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. His eyes drifted to a series of proposals in the packet, his brow furrowed. Julia's name was on almost everyone. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't even a consultant, yet her comments were woven into financial forecasts, marketing directions, even operational changes. She had inserted herself everywhere. And Ryan had let her. Ed rubbed his temples. Julia had always been polished, ambitious, strategic, but he had underestimated her influence. Or maybe he had underestimated Ryan's vulnerability to it. He didn't hear Carla's warning until it replayed again in his memory like a whisper in the dark. Julia wants the company under her control. The thought made his chest tighten, but he wasn't surprised. She had always been comfortable navigating boardrooms, always eager to position herself as smarter than everyone else in the room. But controlling Lawson Technologies, That was something else entirely. He closed the folder carefully, as if it were evidence from a crime scene, and stood up with a decision already forming in his mind. If he didn't confront this now, directly, everything he'd built would be gone. By early evening the next day, he drove to Ryan's house. Their home sat on a quiet residential street, warm lights glowing from the windows. A normal family scene from the outside, one Martha would have loved. But Ed walked to the door with the weight of a battlefield on his shoulders. He rang the bell. Ryan opened the door moments later, looking surprised but not pleased. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Ed didn't waste time. "We need to talk now." Ryan hesitated, already defensive. "Is this about yesterday? Because if this is just you being upset." "Upset?" Ed's voice cracked, not from anger but from hurt. "I reviewed internal memos last night. Memos removing me from departments I founded. Memos where your wife approves changes she has no business approving." Ryan's jaw flexed. "Dad, you're misinterpreting a lot of—" "No," Ed said, stepping inside uninvited. "I'm reading exactly what's on those pages." Ryan shut the door with a frustrated sigh. "You're overreacting. Companies evolve. We're just making some adjustments to streamline." "Streamline," Ed turned to face him fully, "or remove me entirely." Ryan's eyes flickered with something, fear or guilt or stubbornness. Ed couldn't tell. "You've been stepping back anyway. This is just formalizing what was already happening." Ed stared at him. "I never stepped back, you pushed me." For a moment silence stretched between them. Ryan looked away. "Dad, you need to understand, things are different now. We're moving fast and you're—" "Say it," Ed murmured. "Say what you're trying to say." Ryan swallowed hard but didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he looked past Ed toward the staircase. Footsteps echoed faintly. Julia descended gracefully, each step measured, composed. Her expression wasn't surprised to see Ed standing there. She looked prepared. "Edward," she said coolly, "this isn't a good time." Ed's voice stayed steady. "Why is your name on company proposals? Why are you advising my son behind closed doors?" She didn't blink. "Because it's time to move forward." The words landed like a blade, smooth, intentional, and deadly. Julia stepped beside Ryan, one hand lightly touching his arm. The gesture wasn't affectionate. It was possessive, controlling. Ryan didn't push her away. He didn't contradict her. He didn't defend his father. And in that moment, Ed saw the truth more clearly than any memo could show him. His son wasn't leading this power shift. He was being steered, molded, used. But Ryan didn't see it, or didn't want to. Ed looked at his son, searching for the boy he raised, the young man who once asked him how to build a business, how to lead with integrity. What he saw instead was distance, calculation, a hardening he didn't recognize. "You're slipping away," Ed whispered almost to himself, "and you don't even know it." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Dad, you need to leave." Ed nodded slowly. Fighting now would only push him further. He stepped back, measuring every detail, the tension, the defensiveness, Julia's quiet dominance. Then he left the house, not saying another word. When he reached his car, he didn't start it right away. He sat there, staring at the windshield, his mind moving from grief to clarity, from hurt to strategy. If they were documenting his downfall, then he would begin documenting theirs. Quietly, carefully, relentlessly. Because this wasn't just a family disagreement. It was a coup, and now he finally knew it. Ed arrived early for the board presentation, hoping, maybe foolishly, that today would be different. The past week had been a blur of clipped conversations and cold glances, but he still held onto a thin, stubborn belief that things could be salvaged if he simply showed up, contributed, and reminded everyone of who he was. But the moment he stepped into the boardroom, that belief cracked. The room was already full, executives seated, laptops open, notebooks ready. And at the front again stood Ryan. Ed stopped just inside the doorway, absorbing the scene. Ryan was mid-conversation with the CTO, hands moving confidently as he pointed to a set of slides glowing behind him. A large title read, Next Generation Leadership and Innovation Roadmap. It was the kind of presentation Ed would normally lead. Today, no one even turned when he walked in. He took a seat quietly, his expression neutral, though his pulse thumped with a growing heaviness. When the clock hit the hour, Ryan cleared his throat and began. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "Today's discussion is critical to the future of Lawson Technologies. We're moving into a new era, one that requires modern leadership, rapid decision cycles, and a willingness to adapt." Ed listened, jaw tightening slightly. It was the kind of introduction that set the stage for contrast, an old versus new narrative, a narrative someone had fed him. Ryan clicked to the next slide, side-by-side comparisons of innovation timelines. "Our competitors," he continued, "are pushing updates in under 12 months. We're still operating on frameworks established more than a decade ago." A few board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ed's stomach sank. Ryan kept going. "Legacy thinking has served us well, but legacy approaches can't carry us forward anymore. As some of you know, we've experienced slowdowns in several departments this year." Ed felt the jab coming, slow at first, then sharpened deliberately. "And much of that resistance," Ryan said, without looking at him, "stems from leadership that struggles to embrace new efficiency models." The room shifted, not dramatically, just a subtle change in posture, a collective tightening of shoulders, enough to signal that everyone understood exactly who he meant. Ed didn't interrupt. Not yet. He simply watched his son on the stage, watched the confidence that wasn't entirely earned, the certainty that felt borrowed from someone else's influence. And then he saw her. Julia, sitting in the back row, legs crossed, a notebook resting untouched in front of her. But she wasn't taking notes. She wasn't even watching the presentation. She was watching the room, studying every reaction, every nod, every moment of hesitation. Calculating, measuring, assessing who she could sway next. Ryan advanced the slides again. "We need streamlined authority, decisions made without delay, a structure that empowers innovation instead of slowing it down with outdated checks and reviews." He said it smoothly, too smoothly. Ed recognized his own language, phrases he'd used years ago, but twisted into arguments that now cut against him. The CFO shifted in her seat. A senior board member pinched his lips, hesitant but listening. Another nodded reluctantly, as if acknowledging a direction he didn't entirely agree with but felt pressured to accept. Ryan was steering them, and they were letting him. After 30 more minutes of careful rhetoric, strategic implications and subtle digs, Ryan reached the final slide. A single line. Large, bold, well-rehearsed. Proposal: limit founder oversight to ceremonial and advisory functions. The room went still. Ed felt his breath catch. Ryan clasped his hands. "This isn't about disrespect. It's about adapting to the times, about giving the company the agility it needs, and I believe the board will agree that this is the natural next step." Natural. The word burned. Ed leaned forward. "You're suggesting removing the founder from critical decisions, the same founder who built this company from a garage. You're asking them to sideline institutional memory and experience for what? A faster approval chain, a new narrative." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite tone. "Dad, no one is removing you. We're simply clarifying roles." "By stripping mine," Ed said quietly. A few board members looked down at their hands. None spoke. Julia didn't move. She simply watched, expression unreadable, because she already knew the vote was leaning in their favor. Ryan pressed, "We'll take a preliminary vote today, just to gauge sentiment." That was the moment Ed truly understood how quickly the tide had turned. How expertly, how quietly. The vote wasn't binding, but the hands raising around the table felt like nails being driven into a coffin, his coffin. Support shifted with startling ease, years of loyalty dissolving under pressure and showmanship. Ed sat there, stunned, watching people he'd hired, mentored, and trusted offer lukewarm nods in Ryan's direction. He barely heard the meeting close. The ringing in his ears drowned out most of the chatter. People filed out quietly, unwilling to meet his eyes. As Ed stepped out of the room, he found Martha waiting near the hallway. She must have come when she sensed how badly the day would go. Her eyes searched his face, worried but gentle. "Please," she whispered, touching his arm, "don't fight this, not yet." Her voice trembled, not with fear but with wisdom. Ed swallowed hard, nodding once, but inside something else stirred. A quiet resolve that wasn't ready to yield. "Not yet." Carla closed the office door behind her with a soft click, the kind of careful movement that told Ed this wasn't a routine conversation. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw tight, and she clutched a thin flash drive in her hand like it was a weapon she didn't want to use. Ed gestured for her to sit, though he already felt a slow unease gathering in his chest. "Ed," she whispered, leaning forward, "I found something, and you're not going to like it." He steadied himself. "Just tell me." Carla inhaled sharply, then slid a stack of printed spreadsheets across his desk. Ed scanned the pages, expecting the usual: projections, budgeting anomalies, maybe a questionable invoice he'd have to question Ryan about. But this was different. Hidden among the legitimate expenses were line items labeled Strategic Innovation Consulting, vague, repetitive, and dangerously large. He frowned. "These numbers don't make sense. Who approved these transfers?" Carla lowered her voice. "Ryan." Ed's eyes lifted slowly from the page. Why would he? "Keep reading." He flipped to the next sheet, expecting to see the name of a reputable firm. Instead, there it was, a consulting group he'd never heard of, one with no real web presence, no history, no portfolio. A shell, a hollow company pretending to be legitimate. And then, on the final page, the detail that turned the room cold. The firm's registered agents shared a last name he knew too well. Julia S. He stared at the document longer than necessary, as if waiting for the text to rearrange itself into something innocent. But it didn't change. It only grew heavier. "Carla," he said quietly, "are you telling me Ryan has been funneling company money into a consulting group tied to Julia's family?" She nodded. "Hundreds of thousands over the last 6 months, maybe more." His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He'd suspected manipulation, yes. Influence, of course, but embezzlement, hidden through falsified innovation spending, that was a level of betrayal he hadn't let himself imagine. Carla leaned in. "Ed, this is bad. If the board discovers this on their own, they won't blame Ryan. They'll blame you." He blinked. "Why?" "Because you're still listed as co-signatory on the innovation budget. Your approval is technically attached to these transfers. Legally, the trail leads back to you." Her voice trembled. "And Julia knows that." The realization cut through him like a blade. This wasn't incompetence or immaturity. It was strategy. Someone was setting a trap, and he was the one positioned to fall into it. Ed stood slowly, needing air, needing space. "Where is Ryan?" "In meetings with the board," Carla said. "But Ed, don't confront him yet. He won't believe you, not with how deep Julia has gotten into his head." He hesitated, then nodded. She was right. Confronting Ryan in this state would only push him further away. But Julia understood every move she made, and she wanted him cornered. Ed walked out of the office and headed to the executive lounge, where he knew she often lingered between meetings. The room was quiet, empty except for her. Julia sat near the window, scrolling through her phone, looking like she belonged in a magazine spread rather than the heart of corporate warfare. "Julia," he said. She looked up, her expression pleasant but cool. "Edward, something wrong." He stepped closer, placing the folder on the table between them. "We're past games. I know about the transfers." Her face didn't flinch, not even a blink. She simply closed her phone and folded her hands neatly in her lap. "You should be very careful about what you think you know," she whispered. "Those funds went to your family's shell company," he said. "That's embezzlement." Her smile was polite, almost pitying. "Unless you approved it, unless it was part of an initiative you championed, and unless any investigation finds you negligent, not my husband." He felt the air leave his lungs. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't explaining it. She was warning him, quietly, surgically. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a chilling murmur. "Because a company led by a sentimental old man is weak, and weakness tempts opportunists. I'm simply ensuring Lawson Technologies enters a new era." She paused. "With or without you." A faint sound came from the doorway. Ed turned to see Martha standing there, her face pale, her hand trembling around the strap of her purse. She had heard everything. Julia didn't look bothered. She picked up her phone again and walked past Martha without acknowledgement, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on a verdict already delivered. Martha stepped to Ed, her voice barely steadier than a whisper. "Ed, you cannot let her destroy you, or the company." He exhaled, long and controlled. The humiliation in the boardroom, the staged presentation, the memos, the transfers, the trap. Everything connected now. "If Ryan wants a war," Ed said quietly, his eyes narrowing, "I'll fight it." He lifted the folder, gripping it firmly. "But I'll fight it silently." The first sign came early the next morning. Ed logged into his workstation with the same muscle memory he'd carried for decades, expecting to check overnight updates, financial cues, and ongoing project approvals. But instead of dashboards and reports, a red banner appeared across the screen. "Access REVOKED. Contact Administrator." His stomach dropped. He tried again, different login path, different credential chain, only to hit the same locked wall. Someone had removed his access to the internal financial servers. Not restricted. Not limited. Removed. And there was only one person with the authority to make a change that drastic. Ryan. Before the anger could fully settle, his email pinged. A new message. Subject line: "Retirement timeline immediate." Ed clicked it open and froze at the single sentence, staring back at him. "Please retire officially." No greeting. No context. No signature. Just that cold directive, one that felt less like a request and more like a shove off a cliff. He leaned back in his chair, breath leaving him slowly, painfully. Even after the staged board meeting, even after the humiliation, some part of him had believed Ryan would cool down, reconsider, maybe even reach out. But this email proved something far worse. Ryan wasn't cooling down. He was accelerating. By noon, Carla was at his office door again, her expression tight with worry. "Ed," she whispered, "Julia is hosting private dinners with board members. One at the Lakeside Club last night, another planned tonight. She's pulling them into her circle, making promises, securing votes." Votes? For what? For eliminating him completely. For legitimizing this staged transition. Ed could envision it too easily. Julia, polished and charming, spinning narratives over wine and delicate entrees, assuring board members that the company is ready for fresh leadership, that Ed deserves a peaceful retirement, that Ryan's vision needs room to breathe. Poison disguised as progress. Martha noticed the storm in him that evening. She sat beside him on their living room couch, her voice trembling as she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Ed, please," she whispered, "walk away from this. They're turning vicious, and I can see what it's doing to you." He shook his head slowly. I can't walk away from my life's work, Martha. Not like this. Not when I know what they're doing. Not when Ryan is being led into something that could destroy him. She swallowed hard, but at what cost to you? He didn't answer. He couldn't, because a truth had been growing inside him since the day Ryan dismissed him in that boardroom, a truth he was finally ready to face. This isn't just business, he said softly. It's survival. Later that night, his phone buzzed again. Carla. More evidence, her text read. You need to see this in person. He drove to her house, taking back roads, avoiding the company parking lots and cameras. Inside her small dining room, she spread out a new set of documents, altered revenue projections, falsified expense justifications, manipulated cost escalations that made new initiatives look profitable when they were actually draining funds. This is deliberate, Carla said, her voice shaking. They're cooking numbers to make Ryan's strategies look successful. If regulators see this, if shareholders notice swings, it'll look like you signed off on it. Your digital signature is still tied to half of these transactions. Ed felt a cold weight settle in his chest. They're setting up a narrative, he murmured. If anything explodes, I'm the scapegoat. Carla nodded. And if Julia gets enough board members behind her, she'll force an official vote to remove you permanently. You can't fight this alone, Ed. For the first time, he didn't argue. He drove straight to a quiet office block on Mercer Street, where the lights on the third floor still glowed. Attorney Charles Booker, one of the sharpest corporate lawyers in the state, opened the door with a knowing expression. Ed, he said, gesturing him inside, I figured you'd be stopping by sooner or later. Ed placed the documents on Booker's desk. Later would have been better, he replied with a bitter half-smile, but here we are. Booker flipped through the papers, his face growing more serious with each page. This isn't incompetence, he said finally. This is orchestrated, calculated, and dangerous. You'll need full legal protection, a counter-strategy, a paper trail of your own. Ed nodded. Then that's what we'll build. Booker extended his hand. We start tonight. As Ed shook it, he felt the shift inside himself. Not loud, not explosive, but steady and irreversible. The escalation had begun. And there was no turning back. The email arrived early that morning, written in the same sterile corporate tone that had begun seeping into every corner of Ed's professional world. It announced a special company-wide event, mandatory attendance, with exciting leadership updates. Ed felt a knot form in his stomach. Events like this were usually reserved for product launches or milestone celebrations, not leadership changes that had been forced through backdoor deals and manipulated numbers. Still, he went. He had to. He needed to see what Ryan was planning to do and whether he would dare to do it in public. By noon, nearly the entire company had gathered in the main atrium, a huge glass-walled space overlooking the water. Ed stood off to the side of the stage, expecting perhaps a small message, maybe even a subtle announcement. But when the lights dimmed and the giant screens flashed with a new banner, Leadership Transition Initiative, the Lawson legacy enters a new era, he felt the air leave his lungs. Ryan stepped up to the podium, confident, polished, dressed in a tailored suit that made him look every bit the rising CEO he believed himself to be. He held the microphone with practiced ease, scanning the room with the smile of a man certain he had won. Thank you all for joining us today, he began. As we move into a period of rapid innovation, the company needs roles that reflect where we're headed, not where we've been. A murmur rippled through the audience. Ed felt it, an undercurrent of confusion. Ryan continued, For decades, my father has guided this company with incredible dedication. But every great leader must know when it's time to evolve. He gestured toward the side of the stage, toward Ed. A spotlight clicked on above him. The applause started slowly, hesitant, uncertain, but it grew louder, filling the atrium with a hollow enthusiasm that made his skin prickle. He stepped forward mechanically, his feet moving before his mind caught up. He felt exposed, framed, displayed. Ryan placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a firm, performative squeeze. "And so today," Ryan said, "we officially celebrate my father's transition into a symbolic leadership role. He will continue serving as an honorary advisor, representing the spirit of Lawson T. Chnologies, as we embrace a bold future." Ed froze, symbolic. A word that meant everything and nothing. A role that mattered to no one. A position created solely to push him aside while pretending to honor him. His vision blurred for a moment, the applause washing over him in disorienting waves. He forced a smile. It was instinct, survival. But inside he felt the humiliation like a deep bruise spreading across his chest. And then Julia appeared beside him. She leaned in close, close enough that her perfume brushed his skin, close enough that no microphone would catch her words. "Your time is over," she whispered. Her voice wasn't triumphant, it was cold. "Certain." "Deadly." The applause continued, but Ed barely heard it. He stepped back from the spotlight and walked off the stage, each footstep growing heavier. Some employees clapped enthusiastically, others hesitated, and a few looked confused, unsure whether this was a celebration or an execution dressed in corporate language. When he reached the hallway outside the atrium, the whispers began. "Why now? Did he volunteer for this? Is Ryan pushing him out? This doesn't feel right." He didn't respond. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. He simply walked toward the elevator, his humiliation pressing against his ribs like a tightening vice. By the time the elevator doors closed, his hands were shaking. He found Attorney Charles Booker waiting for him in his office later that afternoon, his expression dark with concern. "I saw the announcement," Booker said. "They're trying to rewrite the narrative publicly. That's not just strategy, that's entrenchment." Ed sank into his chair, still wearing the same stunned expression. "They made it look like I agreed to this, like I'm stepping aside willingly." Booker nodded. "That's the goal. They need to make you irrelevant in the eyes of employees and shareholders. If you look like a sentimental figurehead, your credibility drops. And when your credibility drops, any accusation, any investigation can be pinned on you." Ed's hands clenched. "They humiliated me in front of my own people." "That's exactly why you need to stay calm," Booker said firmly. "You lash out now, you lose. You fight quietly, you win. Keep documenting everything. Keep gathering evidence. Let them believe they're winning." Ed breathed slowly, the humiliation gradually giving way to something darker, stronger, a quiet steel settling into his bones. He stood, walked to the window, and stared down at the campus he built from nothing. The building gleamed in the afternoon sun, but beneath its polished exterior, corruption and betrayal festered like rot. "Ryan thinks he's in control," Ed murmured. "Julia thinks she already won." He turned back toward Booker, eyes steady. "It's time I make my move." Because humiliation has a way of clearing a man's vision. And his was razor-sharp now. Ed had grown used to the weight of secrecy, quiet meetings with Booker, late nights spent scanning internal reports, silent rides home where Martha watched him with worried eyes but didn't press. But nothing prepared him for the text Carla sent him just after sunset. "I have something, but you need to come alone." He drove to the far edge of the corporate campus, parking in a gravel lot meant for delivery trucks. Carla emerged from the side door of the finance wing, shoulders hunched, clutching a thick envelope like it contained a live grenade. She glanced around before rushing to his car and slipping into the passenger seat. "Lock the doors," she whispered. Ed obeyed, his pulse tightening. "Carla, what is this?" She handed him the envelope. Inside were dozens of printed spreadsheets, financial projections, quarterly forecasts, and revenue reports, each densely packed with numbers. But as Ed flipped through them under the dim glow of the dashboard light, he saw it immediately. The patterns didn't match reality. These revenue projections, he frowned. They're inflated. Not inflated, Carla corrected softly. Altered. Ed felt a cold, sinking weight settle in his gut. Ryan. Carla nodded. He's been exaggerating revenue for the last 2 quarters. It started small, barely noticeable. But after Julia began advising him behind the scenes, the numbers got bolder. Ed scanned the spreadsheets more closely. Fiscal patterns that should have shown gradual growth now spiked unnaturally. Profit margins that were barely breaking even appeared suddenly robust. Lost accounts were listed as pending renewals, and entire sections were marked with provisional revenue, a phrase Ed had never tolerated in his entire career. His voice dropped. Why would he do this? These numbers don't make sense unless... Unless he's trying to impress the board, Carla finished. They've been questioning his leadership since the investigation rumors started. He's desperate, Ed. Ed leaned back, exhaling slowly. Desperation doesn't justify lying to shareholders. Carla hesitated, then added, that's not all. Look here. She pointed to another set of documents, cash flow timelines that painted an even bleaker picture. Payments delayed, vendor invoices stacking, credit lines stretching, emergency reserves shrinking. Ed's chest tightened. We're weeks away from a liquidity crisis. Maybe less, Carla said. If this quarter doesn't bring real revenue, not fabricated numbers, we're in trouble. He ran a hand over his face. Ryan must know this. He can't be blind. He knows, Carla said, but he thinks he can fix it with optics. As long as the board believes the company is thriving, he believes investor confidence will hold. And if it does... Carla swallowed hard. He's blaming you. Ed felt the words like a blow. What? Privately, Carla said. He's been telling senior managers that older contracts from your tenure, are the reason cash flow is slowing. That you tied his hands with outdated agreements and inflexible structures. Ed stared at the windshield, jaw tightening, the betrayal settling deeper. He had built those contracts carefully, responsibly. They had carried the company through recessions, market crashes, and competitor buyouts. Now Ryan was weaponizing them, weaponizing him, to cover his own failings. Carla continued, voice trembling slightly. And Julia, she's pushing him harder than ever. Ed turned to her. How? She's pressuring him to sign off on a massive acquisition deal, something high risk, high cost, and built on projected revenue that isn't real. She tapped the spreadsheets. If he signs it, the company will collapse. Ed's heartbeat echoed in his ears. Why would she push for a deal like that? She believes the optics of expansion will save him in the short term, Carla said. And long term, I don't think she cares. Or maybe she wants control of the assets that'll fall through the cracks if we go under. The air in the car felt heavy, suffocating. Carla looked at him with pleading eyes. He's digging the company's grave, Ed, and Julia's handing him the shovel. For a moment, neither spoke. Ed stared at the spreadsheets, feeling the old, familiar ache of betrayal, but layered now with something sharper, something more dangerous. Fear for the company he built, anger at the son he loved, and a growing determination that this would not be how his legacy ended. He closed the envelope and set it on the dashboard. Thank you, Carla. You've risked a lot bringing me this. I'm not risking it for you, she said. I'm risking it for the company, and because someone has to stop them. Ed nodded, understanding more than she realized. I will. When he stepped out of the car and looked toward the glowing windows of the corporate tower, something inside him locked into place with absolute clarity. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was planning. And tonight marked the beginning of a strategic strike, one careful, calculated move at a time. Because if Ryan wanted to play with lies and illusions, Ed would fight him with truth. The building was nearly silent when Ed stepped out of the elevator. Midnight had settled over Seattle like a thick blanket, the city lights reflecting off the water beyond the glass walls. Most offices were dark, but one glow remained, Ryan's. A thin sliver of light cut across the hallway carpet like a drawn blade. Ed walked toward it slowly, each step steady but weighted, carrying the exhaustion of sleepless nights and the hardening resolve of a man who finally understood the battlefield he stood on. The envelope from Carla was tucked under his arm, filled with numbers that told a story far more dangerous than family tension. When he reached Ryan's office, he found his son hunched over his desk, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, papers scattered everywhere. Ryan looked up in surprise, eyes rimmed with fatigue and something sharper, defensiveness. "Dad, it's late. What are you doing here?" Ed closed the door behind him. "We need to talk." Ryan sighed, dropping his pen. "If this is about the announcement." "It's not," Ed cut in. "It's about the financials, the altered projections, the inflated revenue, the acquisition deal Julia is pushing you toward." Ryan's expression shifted instantly, tension tightening his jaw, a flicker of panic crossing his eyes before he masked it with irritation. "You went through the reports." "I shouldn't have had to," Ed replied. "They should have been clean." Ryan stood abruptly, shoving his chair back. "You don't get to come in here and question my decisions. This is my company now, my lead, my responsibility." "It's still my legacy," Ed said quietly, "and I won't let you burn it down." Ryan laughed bitterly. "Legacy, that's all you ever talk about." Ed felt something pinch in his chest. "Then tell me why the numbers don't add up, why you're hiding the losses, why you're pretending a crisis doesn't exist." Ryan looked away, eyes darting to the scattered papers as if searching for stability. "It's temporary. The board needs confidence. Investors need confidence. I'm doing what I have to do." "You're lying to them," Ed said. "You're lying to everyone." Ryan's voice cracked sharper than he intended. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't feel the pressure? I'm trying to fix what you left behind." Ed stiffened. "What I left behind?" "You heard me," Ryan snapped. "Those old contracts you refuse to let go of, they're dragging us down. You locked the company into outdated deals years ago. I'm the one trying to clean them up." Ed stared at his son, stunned. "Who told you that?" Ryan hesitated, just a moment, but enough. "Julia." The truth hit Ed like a blow. Julia had been whispering poison, drip by drip, threading narratives into Ryan's insecurities until they became his truth. She'd been rewriting history in his mind for years. "Ryan," Ed said carefully, "those contracts carried us through the recession, through market collapses. They were safety nets, not shackles." Ryan's eyes glistened with something that wasn't anger, something closer to hurt. "You've never believed in me. Not once. You always thought you knew better, that no one could match your brilliance." Ed's breath caught. This wasn't about financial projections. This wasn't even about the company. This was years, decades, of resentment surfacing all at once. "That's not true," Ed said. "I pushed you because I believed in you, because I knew you could lead one day." "No," Ryan whispered, voice trembling. "You pushed me because you didn't trust me. And Julia helped me see that." There it was, clear as crystal. The wedge. The manipulation. The slow erosion of father and son. Ed stepped closer. "She fed you this story so she could control you." Ryan's face hardened. "Stop blaming her. Stop acting like you're the victim here." "I'm not the victim," Ed snapped. "The company is." That struck a nerve. Ryan's shoulders tensed, and he turned away, gripping the edge of his desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "Ryan," Ed said softly, "don't sign that acquisition deal. It'll destroy everything I built, everything we built." Ryan didn't turn around. "I'm signing it tomorrow." "Then you're going to destroy the company," Ed warned, voice low. "And you won't see it until it's too late." Ryan spun around, eyes blazing. "I'm done listening to you. This conversation is over." Before Ed could speak again, Ryan stormed past him, yanking the door open with a force that rattled the frame. The sound echoed through the empty hallway as he disappeared around the corner, leaving the room vibrating with unresolved pain. Ed stood alone in the office, breathing in the remnants of the argument. Anger, fear, betrayal, grief mixing in the stale air like smoke from a fire not yet contained. Slowly, he gathered the scattered papers on Ryan's desk, copies of the inflated projections, fragments of the acquisition proposal, evidence of a crisis disguised as growth. Then he placed them inside the envelope with Carla's documents. When he reached his own office, he shut the door, sat at his computer, and sent every piece of evidence to Booker. His message was brief. Prepare everything, it's time. Because the next move, the one coming in Section 10, would change everything. The next morning began like any other, Seattle's sky half awake, a dull gray stretching across the horizon, but the atmosphere inside Lawson Technologies was anything but ordinary. Ed sensed it the second he stepped through the glass doors. People weren't walking, they were rushing. Conversations weren't casual murmurings, they were frantic whispers. Phones rang from every corner, unanswered, as if employees were too afraid to pick them up. Something had detonated overnight. He took a few slow steps into the lobby before a sharp voice called out behind him. "Edward Lawson." Ed turned. A woman in a tailored navy suit approached, her badge clipped neatly to her jacket. Her presence radiated the kind of authority that silenced entire rooms. Behind her stood two additional officers, each carrying slim black cases. "Detective Mia Halston," she said, extending a hand. "Washington State Financial Crimes Division. We have subpoenas for corporate records and leadership interviews." Around them, employees froze. A few gasped. Someone dropped their coffee. Ed didn't flinch. He accepted the papers calmly. "You're investigating us." "Correct," Halston said. "The evidence submitted anonymously last night was substantial." Ed's brows lifted a fraction. "Anonymous evidence." Halston nodded. "Large-scale financial fraud, document tampering, unauthorized transfers, manipulated projections. The submission included timestamps, screenshots, transaction logs, even internal memos." A ripple of shock surged through the lobby. Ryan, Julia, the board. Everyone was watching. Ryan came sprinting down the stairs from the mezzanine, hair disheveled, tie crooked, face pale. "Detective, whatever this is, we can clear it up immediately. I'm the CEO. You can speak with M." Lee. Halston studied him with a measured calm. "We will. But first, Mr. Lawson, I need you to understand something. The evidence did not implicate your father as the architect of these discrepancies." Ryan blinked rapidly. "What?" "It implicated you." The color drained from his face. And Halston continued. "The source provided detailed notes on the funneling of funds into a consulting group linked to Julia Lawson's family network." Julia appeared behind him then, stepping off the elevator in a crisp white blazer, chin lifted high. But for the first time since all of this began, Ed saw something crack behind her eyes, something brittle. The arrival of law enforcement wasn't part of her timeline. Ryan forced a laugh that broke midway. "This is insane. Who would even?" Halston answered before he could finish. "The whistleblower was your wife's brother." Silence. A stunned, suffocating silence swallowed the entire floor. Even Ed felt a jolt in his chest. Julia's brother, why would he? But Halston kept going. He submitted a full packet of evidence shortly before midnight. His statement alleges that Julia Lawson has been orchestrating a plan to tank the company's valuation through hidden financial instability. Once the stock price dropped low enough, a shell corporation would begin acquiring distressed assets tied to Lawson Technologies at a steep discount. Julia's composure shattered. That's ridiculous. My brother is unstable, he's been cut off, he's lying. But the more she protested, the clearer it became that something was unraveling underneath. Ryan stared at her, confusion turning to horror. Julia, what is she saying? What is she talking about? Julia stepped toward him, grabbing his wrist. Ryan, don't listen to them. This is a smear campaign, your father. Ed lifted a hand calmly. Leave me out of this. Halston continued. According to your brother, Mrs. Lawson positioned you as the decision-maker to shield her own involvement. She needed access through someone trusted by the board, someone easy to influence, someone who wouldn't question her motives. Ryan stumbled back a step. I trusted you, he whispered to Julia. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The board members, summoned by alerts and panicked messages, began filtering into the lobby, faces tight, confused, fearful. Conversations erupted instantly. Words like fraud, liability, shareholder lawsuit, SEC investigation buzzed like hornets. Halston turned to Ed. Mr. Lawson, I'll still need your cooperation in reviewing historical contracts and legacy financial structures. Of course, Ed said. I'll provide whatever you need. His voice was steady, controlled, almost serene. Because unlike everyone else in the room, he wasn't surprised. He'd been preparing for this moment. Ryan stood frozen, staring at the floor as the weight of everything crashed over him. Mr. Ryan Lawson, Halston said, stepping forward, effective immediately, you are suspended pending formal investigation. You are required to surrender access to all internal systems. The entire company fell into absolute silence. Ryan looked up, eyes red, voice cracking. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. For the first time in months, Ed saw the boy he'd raised, not the CEO molded by ambition and manipulation, but a man suddenly aware of how deeply he'd been played. Ed didn't answer, not yet. He simply held the envelope under his arm, the one containing the last pieces of evidence Booker told him to collect, the pieces that would secure the truth, no matter how ugly it became. As Halston escorted Ryan away and panic rippled across the board, Ed exhaled slowly. Everything he'd feared was happening. Everything he'd prepared for was beginning. And the next move, the fallout, was coming fast. The building felt different the next morning, charged, unstable, humming with a nervous energy that pulsed through every hallway. Ed hadn't even made it to his office before department heads began approaching him, one after another, asking for direction, clarification, reassurance. The crisis had shaken them deeply, and the sudden power vacuum left the company wobbling like a ship struck broadside in a storm. By 9 a.m., the board called an emergency closed-door meeting. They were rattled, faces pale, voices sharp, arguments tripping over one another. Half wanted to suspend operations until the investigation settled. Others wanted immediate leadership restructuring. All of them looked to Ed not as the symbolic figure Ryan tried to reduce him to, but as the one person who still understood how to steady the foundation. Edward, the chairman finally said, rubbing his temples, we need someone who can calm the markets and the staff, just temporarily, until we regain our footing. Ed didn't gloat, didn't smirk, he simply nodded once. I'll stabilize operations, but this cannot be a return to the old hierarchy. We rebuild with accountability this time. Relief swept the room. When he stepped Ed out onto the operations floor later that morning, conversation rippled through the employees, voices rising, footsteps quickening. They gathered around him like people seeing land after drifting too long at sea. Some looked frightened, others furious, most simply exhausted. A young engineer looked up at him with trembling frustration. Mr. Lawson, were we really that close to collapse? Ed didn't sugarcoat it. We were closer than any of you should ever have experienced, and it won't happen again. Something in his tone, steady but unyielding, pulled people together. They returned to their workstations with renewed focus, almost protective of the company's heartbeat. A quiet loyalty resurfaced, the kind built over years, not manufactured in flashy presentations or hollow speeches. Meanwhile, Ryan locked himself in his penthouse office across town, refusing to answer calls. Word spread quickly he wasn't speaking to anyone, not Halston, not the board, not even Julia. His isolation wasn't strategic, it was emotional, angry, ashamed. Ed could almost feel the heaviness radiating from him, but he didn't go to him. Not now, not while the truth was still unraveling. And Julia reacted with the precision of someone trained in crisis manipulation. Before noon, she had retained a high-profile defense attorney, released a carefully crafted statement to the press distancing herself entirely from unverified allegations, and appeared at the building only long enough to collect personal items. Rumors swirled behind her like smoke. She's claiming she knew nothing. She's throwing Ryan under the bus. She erased half her emails this morning. But Ed noticed the same thing everyone else did. Her confidence was gone. The calculated poise that once defined her had cracked. She walked through the halls with her chin still high, but her steps were sharper, faster, edged with fear she couldn't hide. Detective Halston, meanwhile, moved through the building methodically, interviewing department heads and scrutinizing the digital trails. When she finally questioned Ryan later that afternoon, the walls he had built around himself began collapsing. Ed wasn't present, but the aftermath told the story clearly. Ryan emerged from the interview pale, shaken, eyes unfocused. Rumors spread that he had contradicted himself multiple times, that he had attempted to shield Julia, then attempted to blame her, then stumbled over his own explanations. His narrative had crumbled under the weight of evidence. "What did he expect?" Carla whispered when she found Ed in his temporary operations office. "You can't lie your way out of something when the numbers themselves tell the truth." Carla had been his rock through all of this, quiet, loyal, sharp as ever. She stepped in beside him, helping craft stabilization memos, rewriting operational directives, and preparing presentations for the board. Slowly, trust began knitting itself back together, not just between Ed and the board, but across the entire company. At one point, she paused at his desk, her voice softening. "You know, people believe in you, Ed. They always have, even when Ryan tried to rewrite the narrative." He nodded but didn't respond, because belief wasn't enough now. Belief steadied the ship, yes, but a storm still raged offshore. As the day wound down, the board's temporary confidence in Ed solidified. Markets responded faintly upward. Employees exhaled. Systems stabilized. But Ed wasn't soothed. When the building had emptied and the sun dipped behind the Seattle skyline, Ed remained in his office, staring at the growing file of evidence spread across his desk: emails, financial logs, altered projections, statements from witnesses, forensic summaries Halston had shared. He was no longer reacting to chaos. He was preparing his next move. A strategic move. A necessary move. One that would determine not only the future of Lawson Technologies, but the truth behind the entire cascading failure that nearly destroyed it. He closed the folder slowly, a steely calm settling into him. Next, he whispered to himself, "We finish this." Because stabilizing the company was only step one. The real strike was coming. It was nearly 10 at night when the doorbell rang, one sharp, frantic press that echoed through the quiet house. Ed had been sitting in his study, the day's documents spread around him, trying to make sense of the company's next steps. Martha was already heading toward the foyer, concern knitting her brow. When she opened the door, the porch light illuminated a figure neither of them expected to see. Ryan. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his tie loosened like he'd yanked at it in a panic. He looked smaller than Ed remembered, shoulders hunched, breath unsteady, his confidence stripped away by the investigation that now shadowed his every move. "Dad," he whispered, voice trembling, I need help." Martha stepped aside instinctively, but Ed remained still in the doorway to his study, watching his son like a man seeing a ghost. Ryan entered the living room slowly, as if afraid the floor might crack beneath him. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Only Ryan's uneven breathing filled the silence. Finally, Ed said, "Sit down." Ryan obeyed, sinking into the couch with a heaviness that spoke of sleepless nights, guilt, and unraveling lies. Martha hovered behind him, hands clasped, torn between maternal instinct and the deep hurt his actions had inflicted. "What do you need?" Ed asked, voice steady, emotion kept behind a locked door. Ryan swallowed hard. "They're tearing me apart in those interrogations. Halston thinks I knew everything. The board won't return my calls. Julia won't answer her phone. Dad, I'm drowning." Ed didn't move, didn't offer comfort, didn't rush to fill the silence. Ryan's voice shook. "I need you to talk to them, to the board, to Halston, to the employees, someone, anyone, please. You have influence, you always have." Ed leaned back in his chair. "And why should I bail you out?" Ryan's head snapped up, eyes flashing with something between pain and anger. "Because I'm your son. That didn't seem to matter when you tried to erase me from my own company." Ryan flinched as though struck. "Dad, I never meant for it to go that far. Ed raised a hand, stopping him. "I listened quietly while you humiliated me in front of the board. I listened while you said my ideas didn't matter. I listened while you let Julia poison this company. I've done enough listening. Tonight, you talk." Ryan looked down at his hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. "You never forgave me," he murmured, bitterness surfacing. "Even when I tried to prove myself, you always looked at me like I wasn't enough." Before Ed could respond, Martha stepped forward sharply. "Ryan," her voice trembled with restrained emotion, "you broke your father." Ryan's head jerked up, stunned. "You humiliated him," she continued. "You pushed him out of the company he built with his own hands. You sided with a woman who used you. And now that everything is falling apart, you come here asking him to fix it." Ryan opened his mouth, but Martha wasn't finished. "You want forgiveness," she said. "Then tell the truth, all of it." Ryan's composure cracked. He buried his face in his hands, voice muffled. "I didn't know what she was doing at first. Julia made it sound like strategy, like vision. She said you were holding the company back, that the board needed modern leadership, that if I didn't take control, I'd lose everything." Ed felt a hollow ache forming beneath his ribs. Manipulation, he had suspected it, but hearing Ryan admit it was different, painful, heavy. "And the financials?" Ed asked quietly. "The inflated projections, the transfers, the acquisition deal." Ryan hesitated, every second widening the space between them. I didn't question Julia's methods," he said. "She handled the consultants. She handled the numbers. She told me the board needed confidence, that the only way to show strength was to push aggressive growth. And You signed everything," Ed finished, "without understanding it." Ryan looked up, shame soaking his expression. "I trusted her." "And now?" Ed asked. Ryan exhaled shakily. "Now I don't know who to trust." Ed studied his son for a long, measured moment. This wasn't the arrogant CEO from the boardroom. This was a man standing in the ruins of his own choices, searching for a way out. "I'll give you one chance," Ed said at last. His voice was soft but unyielding. "Tell the full truth, to Halston, to the board, to everyone." Ryan swallowed. "If I do, I lose everything." Ed's eyes didn't waver. "If you don't, you lose more." Ryan sat frozen, caught between fear and redemption, between the instinct to protect himself and the distant echo of the boy he once was. But he didn't speak, didn't commit, didn't choose. He hesitated, and that hesitation hung in the air like a warning. Because time and the investigation would not wait for him much longer. Rumors move through a company differently when it's already wounded. They don't whisper, they stab. They don't float, they sink deep. And by early Monday morning, Lawson Technologies was drowning in them. Ed heard the first one in the elevator. Two junior analysts whispered behind him, unaware he'd stepped in. They're saying Ed falsified some documents last quarter, something about covering his own losses. The doors opened, and they scattered like startled birds. By the time he reached his floor, 3 more variations had already trickled through the halls. One suggested he'd sabotaged Ryan to regain power. Another claimed the federal investigation had turned its sights onto Ed. A third insinuated he'd manipulated legacy contracts to protect his personal financial interests. All of it false. All of it coordinated. And Ed knew exactly who was behind it. Julia never had subtlety, she had precision. The moment the investigation cornered her, she launched a counterstrike aimed not at clearing her name, but at muddying Ed's. If everyone looked dirty, she might look clean enough to slip away. By noon, the board was officially rattled. 2 members requested clarification. One demanded a forensic review of Ed's old contracts, perfectly timed, perfectly aligned with the rumors already spreading. The chairman called requesting an urgent briefing. The doubt in his voice, quiet and unsteady, told Ed everything. Julia's move was working. He entered his office with a heaviness pressing against his ribs. But before the weight could settle fully, Carla appeared in the doorway, breathless, holding her laptop like a detonator. Ed, you need to see this. He moved to the table as she flipped open the screen. A thread of emails filled the display, each message sharper than the last. Carla pointed to the earliest one, dated months earlier. Look at the sender. It was Julia. The email outlined strategic alignment planning, which at first seemed harmless until Ed read further. Julia wasn't proposing ideas, she was orchestrating them, coordinating board votes, influencing meeting agendas, and worst of all, planning Ryan's ascent as a puppet CEO while she guided decisions through informal channels. A takeover, planned long before the humiliation, before the financial manipulation, before Ryan even realized he was being positioned. Keep scrolling, Carla whispered. The next email chilled him. Julia, once Ryan is secure as CEO, we can initiate a staged decline. Lower stock creates opportunity. Assets acquired cheaply. Company reset under new structure. There it was, the blueprint for the destruction of Lawson Technologies, in Julia's own words. Another email. Ed will resist. We must limit his influence early. Followed by, manipulate perception. Make board question his memory judgment. Ed inhaled slowly. Carla watched him, her voice trembling. She didn't just influence him, Ed. She constructed every step. Ryan wasn't leading anything, he was being led. For a brief moment, Ed felt both fury and sorrow, twisting together like a rope pulling tight around his chest. Ryan wasn't innocent, but he wasn't the mastermind. He had been weaponized. And Julia. She wasn't running anymore. She was fighting. Ed closed the laptop. It's time. Within the next hour, he requested an emergency board meeting. No delays, no excuses. The urgency in his voice cut through their hesitation. They agreed. The boardroom was full when he arrived. Faces tense, phones buzzing, nervous fingers tapping on polished wood. Julia entered moments later, her expression calm, controlled, her attorney positioned just outside the door. Ryan came last. He looked wrecked, eyes sunken, tie crooked, his confidence dissolved into something fragile. When he saw Julia, he hesitated near the doorway, as though debating whether to sit beside her or take a seat alone. Let's begin, the chairman said tightly. Julia struck first. I think we need to address the growing concern, regarding Mr. Lawson's influence over outdated contracts and the possibility that he falsified internal documents to shift liability away from himself. The room stiffened. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided Ed's gaze. Doubt was already poisoning the air. Ed didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched Ryan, his son's face shifting, trying to decode truth from manipulation. Finally, Ed rose slowly. "Before we consider accusations," he said, "we should consider evidence." Julia stiffened. Ed turned to Carla, who stepped forward with the laptop. She projected the email thread onto the screen. Gasps spread like a wave. The board leaned in, first puzzled, then horrified. Each line revealed Julia's plan, her manipulation, her orchestration of Ryan's downfall, her strategy to tank the company and acquire its remains. Ryan's breathing quickened. "Julia, you wrote these." Julia didn't blink. "They're taken out of context." "Context?" Ed's voice was calm, razor-sharp. "You plotted to destroy this company. You used my son as a shield, and now you're trying to smear my name to save your own." Julia's facade slipped. She turned toward Ed, stepping closer, her voice a low hiss. "You think this will save you? I will leak everything about you, your medical files, your evaluations. You think the media won't believe the narrative of an aging founder losing his grip?" A stunned silence fell. Ryan looked at her as though he didn't recognize her at all. Ed didn't flinch. "Threatening me won't stop the truth." Julia's eyes narrowed. Ryan's hands shook. The board waited, frozen between shock and fear. And Ed inhaled once, steadying himself for the moment he came in. Yield was coming next. The clash. The one everything had been building toward. Because after tonight, there would be no turning back. The boardroom felt colder than usual, too bright, too sterile, like a surgical theater where something vital was about to be dissected. Ed stood at the head of the table, the place that had once been his by default, before betrayal and manipulation had pushed him into the shadows. Now, he returned not as a symbol, not as an advisor, but as a man carrying the full weight of the truth. Across from him sat Julia, polished, poised, holding her pen like a dagger disguised as office decor. And beside her, shrinking into himself, was Ryan. His hands shook beneath the table. He didn't try to hide it. The board members shifted uneasily, sensing the tension snapping through the room like static. Everyone knew something explosive was coming, but none of them knew how deep it would cut. "We're here," the chairman began, "to address allegations of fraud, misconduct, and coordinated manipulation within Lawson Technologies. Edward, please proceed." Julia moved first. "Before we start," she said smoothly, "I want to clarify that many of the so-called evidence files being circulated have been misinterpreted. Context matters, and not everything is as deceptive as it appears when taken out of." "Enough," Ed interrupted, his voice calm but unwavering. Julia blinked. The interruption wasn't rude, it was definitive, a line drawn. "You've spent months spinning narratives," Ed continued, "but today we're dealing in facts." He tapped a key on the laptop connected to the screen. A large financial spreadsheet flooded the display, clean, color-coded, impossible to ignore. "These are the real numbers," Ed said. "Not projections rewritten to impress the board. Not revenue statements altered to hide losses. These are the untouched financial trails pulled from the original server caches before access was revoked." Murmurs spread instantly. Julia leaned forward. Anyone could have tampered with those files. "Then explain this," Ed said, clicking again. Emails appeared next, Julia's emails. The ones Carla had uncovered. Plans outlined in her own words. How to undermine Ed, how to manipulate Ryan, how to tank valuation, how to acquire the company's assets cheaply through a shell corporation. Julia's face hardened. These were private brainstorming notes taken out of context. Every company explores hypothetical scenarios. Ed didn't look at her, including hypotheticals about destroying your own husband's company. Ryan shot her a stunned look. She didn't return it. Ed clicked again. Now appeared the transfer logs, the consulting group tied directly to Julia's family, payments routed through shadow accounts, authorization trails leading back to Ryan's login credentials. The board's tension spiked. A few leaned back as if needing distance. Others leaned forward, horrified. "Julia," the chairman said slowly, voice cracking, "this looks damning." "It's fabricated," Julia snapped. "He's trying to save himself." Before she could finish, the boardroom door opened. Detective Mia Halston entered with two uniformed officers behind her. The oxygen seemed to leave the room. "Apologies for the interruption," Halston said, her tone firm, professional. "But this meeting aligns with an active investigation." Julia stood instantly. "I have nothing to do with this. My attorney is on his way." Halston held up two documents, arrest warrants. "Juliana Lawson," she said clearly, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, financial manipulation, and attempted unlawful acquisition of company assets." Julia's breath caught. For the first time her mask broke, not with fear but with rage. "This is a setup," she screamed. "You're all being played. Ryan, say something, say something." All eyes turned to him. Ryan looked at her, really looked at her, as if finally seeing the full shape of the person he'd married. His voice shook when he spoke. "I can't." Julia froze. Ryan stood slowly, tears forming. "I let her influence me. I let her steer decisions I should have questioned. I approved transfers I didn't understand. I lied to myself, to the board, to my father." His voice cracked. "I thought I was proving something, but all I was doing was destroying everything." Julia's expression twisted. She lunged toward him, but Halston stepped in, gripping her arm. Julia tried to wrench free. "You coward, you would have been nothing without me." Ryan folded into his chair, head in his hands. Ed felt no triumph, only the heavy ache of a father watching his son break apart from the inside. As the officers led Julia out, still shouting, still denying, still clawing at a narrative she no longer controlled, the room remained frozen in stunned silence. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "Given these findings, and given Mr. Ryan Lawson's suspension pending full investigation, we must vote on interim leadership." There was no hesitation this time. One by one, hands lifted. "Unanimous." "Edward Lawson," the chairman said, "you are hereby reinstated as acting CEO of Lawson Technologies until further notice." Ed nodded, absorbing the weight of the decision, the responsibility, the trust returning to him piece by fractured piece. But even as the board dispersed, some shaken, some relieved, some humbled, Ed didn't move from his chair. Because he knew the clash wasn't truly over. Not yet. The aftermath still waited in the shadows. The boardroom had emptied, but the air still vibrated with the echoes of chaos. Julia's angry shouts had faded down the hallway, swallowed by the building's thick walls as Halston's officers escorted her to the waiting patrol car. But her absence didn't bring peace. It left something heavier, an unease that didn't belong to the company or the board or even Halston. It belonged to Ryan. He sat at the far end of the table, shoulders caved inward, hands trembling against the polished wood. His eyes were red, unfocused, drifting between guilt and bewilderment. Ed watched him quietly, standing at the head of the table he'd reclaimed only moments ago. But victory felt hollow when his son looked so broken. Detective Halston re-entered the room, closing the door behind her. She held a thin file in her hand, something that looked almost too small to contain anything meaningful. But Ed recognized the expression on her face, a mixture of resolve and reluctance. "Mr. Lawson," she said, looking between father and son, "there's one more matter we need to clarify." Ryan straightened abruptly, panic flashing in his eyes. I already told you everything. I didn't know she was. Halston raised a hand gently. This isn't about Julia. The room went still. Halston placed the file on the table and slid it toward Ed. We've confirmed the true identity of the anonymous whistleblower who submitted the financial evidence. Ed frowned. You said earlier it was Julia's brother. Halston inhaled slowly. We were misled by the routing metadata. It wasn't him. Ryan's breathing sharpened. Halston turned her gaze onto him, direct, unwavering. It was you, Ryan. A stunned silence fell so heavy it felt physical. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted to Ed, then to the file on the table, then away entirely. Ed felt the world tilt. What? He whispered. Halston continued gently, but with the precision of a scalpel. You sent the evidence. You tried to hide your identity by routing the email through an account associated with your brother-in-law, but forensic analysis traced the upload back to your home network. Ryan's hands flew to his face, fingers digging into his hair. I didn't think you'd. I never meant, Dad, I'm sorry. Ed staggered back a step, not physically, but somewhere deeper, somewhere that had already been bruised too many times. You leaked the evidence, he asked softly. You. Ryan nodded, covering his face. I had to. Julia was out of control. She was going to sink the whole company, and she didn't care who she took with her. I thought if I sent the evidence anonymously, the investigation would expose her. Ed swallowed hard. Then why didn't you tell me? Because, Ryan's voice cracked, because I didn't want you to think I needed you to save me. The words weighed differently, heavier, more painful than any accusation had been. Halston laid out the rest. He provided enough evidence to implicate Julia, yes, but not enough to clear himself. He was trying to expose her without admitting his own involvement. Ryan lowered his hands. Tears streaked across his face. I knew you'd help me if you thought I was blindsided. I knew you'd fix everything. I knew the board would trust you. His voice broke completely. I wanted her arrested, but I wanted you to save me. Ed's heart cracked in a way he didn't expect. All the layered betrayals, the public humiliation, the manipulation, the power grab, had been terrible enough. But this was something else entirely. You played both sides, he whispered. You let your wife guide you into destroying this company, and then you tried to use me to pull you out when the walls caved in. Ryan sobbed into his hands. Dad, please, I didn't know what else to do. I was in too deep. I was scared. I never wanted to hurt you like this. But intention didn't matter now, not with the truth burned into the open. Halston's voice was steady. Juliana Lawson will be charged with felony fraud, conspiracy to commit financial manipulation, and attempted corporate sabotage. A small flicker of vindication rippled through the room, but it didn't reach Ed. He only felt the throb of a deeper wound. And Mr. Ryan Lawson, Halston continued, will also face charges for his role in the financial misrepresentation and unauthorized approvals. However, she glanced at Ed. His cooperation as the whistleblower will grant him leniency, possibly significant leniency. Ryan looked up with wet, swollen eyes, hope clinging to the E. Just like a man trying to catch a lifeline. But Ed didn't move toward him. He didn't step closer, didn't wrap an arm around him, didn't even soften his expression. Instead, he lowered into the chair across the table, folding his hands slowly. Ryan, he said, voice quiet but unbreakable, you didn't just betray the company or the board. You betrayed yourself long before you betrayed me. Ryan sobbed harder, desperation spilling into the room, echoing off the sterile glass walls. I know, he whispered, I've lost everything. Ed felt the ache of that truth too. His son hadn't just gambled his career. He'd gambled trust, family, identity, and lost all of it in one catastrophic sweep. Halston closed her file. We'll proceed with processing, but Mr. Lawson, she nodded to Ryan, your cooperation will be noted. As Halston stepped out, leaving father and son alone in the quiet, Ed knew the company's battle was far from over. The legal storm had only begun. The emotional fallout was still gathering, and the weight of what came next pressed down on both of them. Heavy, irreversible. Ed returned to the executive floor the next morning not with triumph, not with swagger, but with a quiet dignity that settled over him like a well-worn coat. The building, normally buzzing with early productivity, felt strangely subdued. Employees looked up when he walked by, not with fear, not with gossiping curiosity, but with a sincere, almost protective respect. They offered small nods, hesitant smiles, a few silent acknowledgments that spoke louder than any applause. Ed didn't linger in any hallway. He didn't announce his authority. He simply stepped into the office he had occupied for most of his life, a space stripped of personal photos after Ryan's modernization, now bare and echoing. He stood by the window, letting the morning light stretch across the city. Seattle looked colder today, as if reflecting the aftermath of the storm still shaking the company's foundation. Then Martha appeared in the doorway. She didn't speak at first. She simply looked at him, really looked at him, her eyes softening when she saw the exhaustion he tried so hard to hide. She walked in quietly, placing a gentle hand on his back. "You haven't slept," she murmured. Ed gave a small shrug. "There's too much work to do." "There will always be work to do," she said, stepping closer. "But you won't survive rebuilding this company if you fall apart first." Ed wanted to deny it, to tell her he was fine, but when she slipped his glasses off and studied the lines under his eyes, he felt the truth pressing against his ribs. He was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from betrayal, grief, and the weight of carrying an entire company on his shoulders, again. Martha cupped his cheek gently. "Promise me you'll slow down, at least sometimes. Let me help you." Her voice cracked slightly, and that was what undid him. Not the investigation, not the board, not Julia's schemes. This, Martha's trembling plea, her fear for him. "I'll try," he whispered. And she believed him. She kissed his forehead, then left him to his day, but not before pausing in the doorway. "You didn't deserve any of this, Ed, but you're still standing." He nodded. "I have to." And he meant it. By mid-morning, Ed gathered the leadership team. Carla stood beside him, not behind him, not to the side, but as an equal presence. She had been the quiet backbone through the chaos, and the board finally recognized what Ed had known for years. She was the force that kept Lawson Technologies from collapsing entirely. "Before we begin," Ed said to the room of shaken department heads, "I want to announce that effective immediately, Carla Nguyen will serve as acting COO." A gasp rippled through the room, not out of disapproval but relief. Carla blinked, taken aback, but Ed gave her a single nod, a quiet acknowledgement of trust earned over decades. Carla stepped forward, composed but visibly moved. "We're going to rebuild this place the right way," she said. "That means honesty, transparency, accountability. Whatever comes next, we face it together." For the first time in months, the room felt united. Meanwhile, in the Lawson household, another kind of rebuilding was beginning, one far more fragile. Ryan arrived later that afternoon, suitcase in hand, shoulders slumped. Martha opened the door with a mixture of sorrow and motherly instinct, pulling him into a hug before he could say a word. His face crumpled against her shoulder, not with anger this time, but with shame, raw and overwhelming. Ed watched from the hallway. Ryan eventually looked up, eyes swollen. "Dad, if you don't want me here, I understand." Ed didn't answer immediately. His mind flashed through everything, his humiliation in the boardroom, the financial manipulation, the lies, the whistleblower revelation. And yet, this was still his son. His broken, misguided son who had finally seen how deeply he'd let darkness pull him under. "You can stay," Ed said quietly, "temporarily." Ryan nodded slowly. Thank you. But listen to me carefully, Ed continued, voice firm. I won't shield you. I won't help you avoid consequences. And I won't pretend trust can be rebuilt overnight. Ryan swallowed hard. I know. I'm not abandoning you, Ed added softly, but I won't enable you either. Ryan's eyes welled again, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, accepting the boundary, the distance, and the small, fragile thread of connection still holding them. The next day, the board issued a public statement, one Ed hadn't demanded, but one they insisted on delivering. They apologized. Formally, publicly, without excuses. They acknowledged the misjudgments, the manipulation they fell prey to, and the harm caused by their willingness to believe narratives that discredited him. They reaffirmed his role as acting CEO and pledged full cooperation in restoring Lawson Technologies to stability. Ed read the statement only once. He didn't revel in it. Vindication didn't erase the pain of the past months, but it steadied his footing for what came next, which was rebuilding. Policies rewritten, oversight corrected, departments restructured, trust reconstructed brick by brick. Carla handled operations with a calm authority that reassured even the most shaken employees. Martha watched Ed carefully, reminding him when to rest, when to breathe. Ryan moved through the house like a man learning to walk again, unsure, remorseful, trying to understand the damage he caused. Ed spent long nights at his desk, drafting the next phase of recovery. The company wasn't whole yet, and neither was he. But for the first time in a long time, the path ahead wasn't fogged with betrayal. It was illuminated. Not by triumph, but by resolve. A steady, growing resolve to finish what he started. To rebuild what had been broken. To prepare for the reckoning still coming. For the first time in weeks, the Lawson home felt quiet, not tense, not heavy, just quiet in that unsettling way that follows the storm but precedes the rebuilding. Rain pressed softly against the windows, tapping in slow, steady rhythms that filled the silence Ryan left behind every time he retreated to the guest room. He kept to himself mostly, moving like a shadow through the hallways, speaking only when spoken to, unsure how to exist in the same space as the man he had betrayed. Late one morning, Ed found him lingering at the edge of the kitchen. He stood there without stepping fully inside, as if afraid to intrude. His hands were clasped, his posture slouched with the weight of the investigation, guilt, and a kind of self-consciousness Ed had never seen in him before. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you have a minute?" Ed didn't turn away from the coffee pot immediately. He finished stirring, set the spoon down, and then faced him. "I do." Ryan stepped closer. I want to make things right, not just because of the investigation, not because of the board, because of you." His voice wavered. "I know I hurt you, more than I even realized, and I need to fix that if you'll let me." Ed studied him, really studied him. Ryan looked stripped, raw, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him. A boy again, but a boy carrying the wreckage of a man's mistakes. "I'm willing to try," Ed said. "But understand this clearly. I'm not offering forgiveness as a shortcut. You will have to earn trust through action, not apology." Ryan nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." "No more posturing," Ed continued. "No more half-truths. No more letting other people think for you. If you want a relationship with me, you show up. You take responsibility. You grow." Ryan's eyes glistened. "I will." Later that afternoon, Martha joined Ryan at the dining table with her gentle, unwavering calm. She had always been the bridge between them, even when they didn't deserve it. "I found a therapist who specializes in family systems and financial misconduct cases," she said softly. "Someone who understands what you're going through and what you've put others through." Ryan didn't flinch away. "I'll go." And she added, placing a folder in front of him, "Your lawyer sent this. Financial accountability protocols. A strict monitoring program. It won't be easy." It shouldn't be, Ryan murmured. Martha touched his hand, the kind of simple gesture that forgives nothing but offers hope. Healing isn't punishment, it's rebuilding. Over the next several days, Ryan kept his word. He went to therapy twice a week. He attended accountability meetings. He spent hours reviewing financial practices he'd once arrogantly ignored. He didn't ask for praise. He didn't expect comfort. He simply worked. And Ed watched, always from a distance, always weighing whether this new humility would last. One evening, after Martha had gone to bed and the house had settled into its nighttime stillness, Ryan approached the doorway of Ed's study. He hesitated before speaking. "Dad, can I sit?" Ed nodded, and Ryan lowered himself into the chair opposite him. The lamplight softened the lines on Ed's face and illuminated the quiet remorse on Ryan's. "There's something I need to tell you," Ryan began. "Something I should have said a long time ago." Ed closed the folder in front of him, giving his full attention. "Go on." Ryan looked down at his hands, twisting them slowly. "I was jealous of you my whole life." His voice trembled. "Everyone respected you. Everyone admired you. I grew up watching people light up when you walked into a room, and I just never felt like I could be that." Ed swallowed, the ache rising in his chest. Ryan continued, the confession spilling out in uneven breaths. "I thought the only way to step out of your shadow was to push you aside, to prove I didn't need you. And Julia, she fed that jealousy, told me you didn't really believe in me, that you saw me as weak, that the company would never accept me unless I forced myself into power." Ed's voice was soft, "And you believed her." "I wanted to," Ryan whispered, "because it was easier than admitting I was scared I'd ever measure up." Ed exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. "I failed too, Ryan." Ryan looked up sharply. "I failed to see how much pressure you put on yourself," Ed said. "Failed to see the insecurity beneath the ambition. I pushed you hard, yes, but I should have also told you more often why I believed you could lead one day. I thought you knew." Ryan blinked rapidly, tears gathering. I really didn't." Ed's expression softened, not with forgiveness, not yet, but with understanding. A bridge forming where before there had only been rubble. "You let jealousy steer you," Ed said, "and I let silence steer me. Both led us here." Ryan nodded, emotion choking his voice. "Dad, I don't expect a clean slate. I don't expect anything, honestly. I just want to start rebuilding, even if it's slow." Ed paused, long enough for the weight of everything between them to settle. Then he said, "We'll rebuild, carefully, one step at a time." Ryan bowed his head, a quiet sob breaking from him. Not dramatic, not desperate, just the release of a man finally seeing a way out of the dark. The connection between them, thin, fragile, trembling, began stitching itself back together. Not healed, not whole, but beginning. The conference hall buzzed with a different kind of energy than Ed had grown used to over the past turbulent months, lighter, hopeful, almost electric. Rows of young employees filled the space, their faces bright with curiosity instead of fear. On the elevated stage, a banner stretched across the back wall, the LAWSON Initiative for Innovation. It wasn't just a program. It was a statement. Ed stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone with the kind of deliberateness that came from years of leadership and a renewed understanding of what stewardship meant. The room quieted immediately. "This company," he began, "was built on one belief: good ideas can come from anywhere, and for too long that belief got buried under hierarchy, ambition, and fear." His gaze swept over the audience. "Today, we're starting over." Applause rose, genuine, warm. Not for spectacle, not out of obligation, for possibility. The Lawson Initiative wasn't about shiny pitches or quick profits. It was about giving young innovators the space to experiment again, the freedom to fail safely, and the encouragement to grow without fear of being overshadowed or silenced. It was everything the company had lost during the months of deception and chaos. And Ryan was in the audience. He didn't sit in the front. He chose a seat near the middle, dressed plainly, no tailored suit, no CEO posture. When Ed announced that applications for the program would open immediately, Ryan didn't clap louder than anyone else. He simply nodded, as if accepting a challenge only he could hear. 2 days later, his application landed on Carla's desk. He hadn't mentioned it to Ed. He didn't rely on his last name. He didn't ask for advice or favors. He submitted the same form every junior analyst did, 2 pages outlining a modest but insightful operations tool that streamlined internal communication for project teams. Nothing revolutionary, but it was earnest, thoughtful, real. Carla reviewed it twice before she walked into Ed's office, closing the door behind her. "He applied," she said. Ed looked up from the restructuring reports, expression unreadable. "How was it?" "Good," Carla said honestly. "Not great, not polished, but honest. He didn't lean on anything artificial this time." She hesitated. "I think he's really trying." Ed nodded, a slow, measured gesture. "Then treat him like any other applicant." Carla raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" He managed a faint smile. "If he's rebuilding, he starts where everyone else does." When Ryan received the acceptance email, he didn't celebrate, didn't boast. He simply closed his laptop and exhaled, a long, shaky breath that felt like the beginning of something fragile and hard-earned. Under Carla's mentorship, he began at the ground floor. She didn't coddle him. She didn't spare him tough feedback. She didn't allow excuses. He attended workshops, joined team brainstorms, took on tasks younger employees had mastered years earlier. At first he stumbled, a lot, but the stumbles humbled him rather than hardened him. Ed watched quietly from a distance, sometimes from the balcony overlooking the engineering floor, sometimes from a window outside a conference room where Ryan presented early prototypes, sometimes from a board meeting where Carla spoke highly of Ryan's progress, but always cautiously, always anchored in truth rather than sympathy. Pride flickered in Ed occasionally, but it never glowed unchecked. Pride had to be earned now. Meanwhile, the company itself began to breathe again. Departments operated with clarity instead of chaos. Employees collaborated without the paranoia that once infected the halls. Transparency became standard practice, not a buzzword tossed around in meetings. The stock stabilized, then grew. Clients who had backed away returned cautiously, reassured by the company's renewed integrity. In the quiet of his office one evening, Ed found himself staring at the lake outside, a view he'd stopped noticing years ago. The water reflected streaks of gold and deep blue, the day fading into peaceful twilight. He pressed a hand against the window, feeling the cool glass. For the first time in a long while, he let himself imagine it. Retirement. Not the forced kind. Not the humiliating kind. The kind a man chooses when he knows the company is safe, the future secure, and the next generation ready to lead with integrity rather than ego. He wasn't there yet, but the thought didn't sting anymore. Martha joined him at the window, slipping her arm around his. "It's getting better," she whispered. "It is," he said. And it was true. Bitterness had loosened its grip. Chaos had settled. Peace, not loud, not dramatic, had begun to seep back into the company, into the home, into the slow, careful healing between father and son. A company reborn. And quietly, a family inching toward the same. Ed stood alone in the boardroom, the same one where months earlier his world had tilted sharply off its axis. The long table gleamed under the overhead lights, polished back to its original shine after countless tense meetings had dulled it. Outside the wide windows, the Seattle skyline glimmered in the late afternoon haze. But inside, everything felt still, suspended, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He chose this room deliberately. Not out of cruelty, not to test Ryan, but because some wounds can only be closed where they were opened. When the door finally creaked, Ed turned. Ryan stepped in, hesitant at first, then fully crossing the threshold as if stepping into a past he'd spent months trying to outrun. He wasn't dressed like the CEO he once pretended to be, nor like the broken man who'd shown up at their house weeks ago. He looked steady, nervous but steady. "Dad," he said quietly. "Sit," Ed answered, gesturing to the chair directly across from him. Ryan took the seat, eyes scanning the room with a flicker of recognition and regret. Ed could almost feel the memories hitting him, the arrogance he carried that day, the applause that wasn't applause but a verdict, the humiliation he forced onto the father who had given him everything. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ryan drew a long breath. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Ed nodded once. Ryan's voice shook as he began. "I'm sorry, Dad, for everything. Not just for the fraud, not just for believing Julia, for all of it. For the years of resentment I let build up. For the way I treated you like an obstacle instead of the man who built the foundation I was standing on." He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly, grounding himself. "You didn't deserve the way I spoke to you, or the way I humiliated you in this room," he continued. I thought the only way to become someone was to push you out of the way. I thought I had to kill the giant to become one. But I just ended up hurting the only person who actually believed in me." Ed felt something shift inside him, not release, not relief, but recognition. This wasn't the forced apology of a man trying to escape consequences. There was something deeper, something real. Ryan swallowed. "I don't expect you to forget it. I don't expect anything, honestly. I just want you to know I see it now, all of it, what I did, what it cost you, what it cost the company, what it almost cost our family." His voice broke. "I will never betray you again, ever." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't filled with accusation or history. It was filled with choice, Ed's choice. He exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Ryan, I forgive you." Ryan's head snapped up, eyes wet. "But listen to me carefully," Ed continued. "Forgiveness does not erase memory. It doesn't restore trust instantly. What happened here," he tapped the table lightly, "will always matter. Because it changed both of us. Because it forced you to break and forced me to confront things I avoided for years." Ryan nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. But Ed added, softening, "Forgiveness means I'm not holding your future hostage to your past. It means we move forward. Slowly, honestly." Ryan wiped his face with the back of his hand, nodding again, harder this time. "Thank you, Dad, thank you." The door opened quietly and Martha stepped in, hesitant, unsure whether the timing was right. When she saw the look on both their faces, the tears, the exhaustion, the relief, she pressed her hand against her chest, emotion swelling through her entire expression. "Are we okay?" she whispered. Ryan stood immediately, crossing to her. "Mom, I'm trying, really trying." She cupped his face with both hands, brushing away the lingering tears. "That's all we ever needed." When Ed rose from his chair and joined them, something unexpected happened, something the company hadn't seen in months, something their home hadn't felt in far longer. They laughed. Not loudly, not to mask anything. Just a small, relieved, genuine laugh that bubbled up like a release valve finally loosening. Years of tension loosened in that moment. Years of misunderstanding, pride, ambition, and silence unwound just enough to let something new begin. Healing wasn't a promise. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't even complete. But it was real. And in that boardroom, where betrayal first cracked the foundation, Ed felt something settle into place he thought he'd never feel again. A father's hope. The morning sun rose over Seattle in soft gold, spilling across the Lawson Technologies campus like a quiet blessing. Ed walked through the main doors slowly, savoring every small detail, every reflection on the polished floor, every distant hum of early work beginning, every familiar scent of fresh coffee drifting from the break room. He had walked this path tens of thousands of times, but today it felt different. Today was the last. He moved down the hallway toward the atrium, expecting a quiet send-off, maybe a few handshakes, maybe a nod from someone who understood what he had carried all these years. Instead, the moment he stepped into the open atrium, the room erupted. Hundreds of employees rose to their feet in unison. Applause thundered off the walls, echoing through the glass and steel like a living heartbeat. It wasn't polite applause, not manufactured, not orchestrated, not the forced celebration Ryan had once put him through. This was gratitude. This was respect. This was legacy. Ed paused, breath catching in his chest. He felt the applause move through him, warming places that had gone cold during the months of betrayal and uncertainty. It didn't heal everything, but it marked something important. A full circle. A return to honor. As he walked forward, employees lined the path leading to the center of the atrium. Some clapped with misty eyes. Others smiled, real, warm smiles that reminded him of the company's earliest days. A few reached out to shake his hand, murmuring soft words. "Thank you. We're still here because of you. We won't forget what you built." Every word settled deep inside him. And then he saw Ryan, standing near the front waiting, not taking the spotlight, not forcing a moment. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, posture respectful, expression a mixture of pride, humility, and something more vulnerable, gratitude. When Ed reached him, the applause softened, becoming a supportive murmur beneath the moment. Ryan stepped forward slowly. "Dad." Ed nodded. "Ryan." They looked at each other, two men who had gone to war without leaving the office, two men who had broken and rebuilt something most families never could. There wasn't fear in Ryan's eyes anymore. No defensiveness, no ambition clouding his judgment. Only honesty. Ed reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, creased from years of being tucked in drawers and pockets. He handed it to Ryan. "The founding principles," Ed said softly. "The ones I wrote in our garage before this company had a name." Ryan unfolded it with careful hands. At the top, written in his father's precise handwriting, were the words Ed had lived by for decades. Build with integrity. Lead with compassion. Innovate with purpose. Protect the people who trust you. Ryan's voice cracked. "I've read the plaque version, but this is different." "That's the original," Ed said. "The one I carried with me before the board, before the investors, before the buildings." Ryan blinked back emotion. "Why give it to me?" "Because," Ed said, "you're ready for it now." Silence settled between them, soft, warm, grounding. Ryan looked up, eyes shining. "Dad, your ideas built this place. Not my strategies, not Julia's schemes, not the board's decisions. It was you, what you believed, who you were." Ed's chest tightened, not with pain this time, but with something close to peace. He placed a steady hand on Ryan's shoulder. "Carry them forward, not because they're mine, but because they're right." Ryan nodded, gripping the founding document as if it were something sacred. A final round of applause rose behind them, gentler this time, almost reverent. Ed turned toward the exit doors, sunlight spilling through the glass, stretching a bright path ahead. He walked toward it slowly, each step releasing another weight he'd carried too long. Fear faded, bitterness dissolved. The storm that had almost destroyed his life settled behind him like distant thunder. When he pushed open the doors and stepped outside, the sun warmed his face. The breeze off the water brushed against him, light and familiar. He smiled, not wide, not triumphant, just quietly, deeply content. And as he took his final step away from the office he built, he spoke the line he had waited months to say. Why the truth he had earned through pain, perseverance, and a love that outlasted betrayal. My ideas didn't stop mattering. My son finally remembered why they mattered.